Well, today it's up to Barb to figure out where we're at because Margie's not here and neither is Lauren. Is Margie all right? Anybody?
Yeah, she texted me and she said she's got a cough and
Oh,
so she thought she'd stay home Tuesday.
all right.
I've got H on page 4.
All right, let me find my notes here. We're in chapter 21. I know that part.
28.
We got a couple ideas. I haven't decided yet. Or flushed it out. I got some ideas from Kathy gave me an idea, so I'm trying to flush it out how I'm going to do it yet. Okay, so H, so 18 through 20. All right, that's thought. We got down to looking at the building or the city description. All right, so chapter 21, of course, is looking at that heaven scene. And so we've finished chapter 20, the end of chapter 20. We saw the judgment. So the wicked have been put in hell. The righteous have received their reward. Chapter 21 is that picture of heaven in the church in heaven. Now, I thought it was interesting. Dale and I talked a little bit about this last week, and he mentioned it in one of his sermons. He says, heaven is not going to be a place where we just sit around and just, not literal, of course, but the fact that it's a place that we will serve, that we will be singing, praising, worshiping God, things like that, and so we see that imagery in chapter 21 and chapter 22 of some of that. And so it's just interesting to think about how heaven is going to be. And so we get down to, starting in verse 9, really verse 14 also, and starts to describe this city. Now, of course, none of this is literal. This is a spiritual place, and we do not understand how amazing heaven will be. Verse 16 and 17, the angel used a reed to give the dimensions of heaven. And what did he come up with? What was the size of heaven? What was its dimensions? Remember? It's not a literal dimension, but what was the dimensions that were given? Yeah, and so it was in a cube, right? So it was a box. It wasn't a circle. It wasn't anything else. It was a square. It was a cube. And so the idea there is the fact that a cube meant perfect. It's a perfect place. If you remember, the holiest of holies was in a square, in a perfect cube. And so it was a 10 by 10 by 10. We see that used different times. 12 is a perfect number. And so a cube, an ancient symbol of perfection. And so the city is described as being that perfect place. And that's what it's meaning. It doesn't mean that it's literally that many furlongs, but it means that it is a perfect place. And so...
When they talk about a city, are they talking about, like, we think of a city now, an area in heaven, or is it the entire heaven?
It's the...
You feel like the verses 10 through, I don't know, 21 is talking about an exterior, where 22, I don't know, to the end of the chapter or something, it sounds more interior.
To me, it seems like it's describing heaven itself. The walls are the outside edge as a whole. And so the outside is, has described the walls, which we talked about the walls last week or 2 weeks ago. And there's really no need for walls, right? Because where's all the wicked? They're gone. They're not going to be able to penetrate heaven, to get into heaven at all. And so I imagine this picture that we're seeing here as heaven in its entirety, and given that picture there. And so verse 18, it says, the construction of its walls was of jasper, and the city was of pure gold, like clear glass. The foundation of the wall of the city were adorned with all kinds of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, the fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardis, the 7th chrysolite, the 8th beryl, the 9th topaz, the 10th chirophase, I guess I'm saying that right, the 11th jacinth, and the 12th amethyst. And I'm not saying some of those right. But anyways, Holly's probably going, Okay. And so you see these stones. Now, what are these stones? Well, 8 of these stones were mentioned in the breastplate of the high priest. If you go back to Exodus 28, somebody want to read that? Exodus 28, 17 through 20. Exodus 28, 17 through 20. You get to read some of the same words. Whoever wants to do it.
He shall put settings of stones in it, 4 rows of stones. The first row shall be a sardis, a topaz, and an emerald. This shall be the first row. The second row shall be a turquoise, a sapphire, and a diamond. Third row a jacinth, an agate, and an amethyst. And the fourth row a beryl, an onyx, and a jasper. They shall be set in gold settings. And how far?
Through 20. All right, so 8 of these stones are mentioned in the breastplate of the high priest. And so this was something that the high priest would wear when he would go into the holiest of holies, when he was performing his duties. And so 8 of these stones are mentioned. Now, something to think about as we read these names, or kind of try to describe what they are, these stones. Some of these are not even known today. Some of these are not, and some of the names have changed. And so I think a couple weeks ago, Lauren was talking about one of them was the color of it was different than what we were kind of describing. Well, that's because today's name for it is probably a little different than it was then. So jasper was maybe diamonds, gold, of course. We know what gold is, like glass. It was very shiny. We've seen that before. Sapphire is kind of the shades of blue. Chalcedony is a green carbonate of copper. Emerald is a green stone. Sardonyx it's a highly valued white, broken with layers of red or brown. Sardis, yellowish brown, transparent red. And then you continue on, you see the different colors that they're there. But does it really matter? What is it showing to us? What is it saying about the building material of this city? It's very precious, right? These are all very precious stones. And so in our minds, when we try to picture how great heaven will be, it's all physical, right? We're trying to think of a city with streets. That's what the description that's given here. But the picture is that it's precious. It's beyond our imagination. It's so beautiful. It's so great. It's so amazing. So perfect. That's what heaven will be. We try to imagine the most beautiful, the most amazing thing on this earth, and it is nothing in comparison to what heaven will be like. When you think about it, the streets are made of gold. How many places do they use gold in their streets? Nowhere. There's probably places that have gold on the floor and very expensive palaces or whatever. But the street material was gold. That's it. It's just trying to give us as a picture of how amazing heaven will be. And so you jump down to verse 21. It says the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Each individual gate was of 1 pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold, like transparent glass. So the gates, each gate was a pearl. That's a pretty big pearl, isn't it? How big are pearls normally? Pretty small, right? And so each gate was a pearl. Of course, that's not literal, but what does white represent? Purity, right? Revelation 21:27, we see that in that picture there. Nothing can enter that defiles, and so that gate represents purity. So nothing that is not pure can enter through those gates, which is what we see at the end of chapter 21. But there shall be no means enter into anything that defiles or causes an abomination or a lie, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. Those that are able to enter through that pure gate have to be pure. How do they become pure? Through Christ, right? Through his obedience to the gospel. And so if they are not cleansed by the blood of Christ, if they are not pure, made pure, they didn't live their whole life pure, right? Because we all sin, right? But being in Christ, we have that ability to continually be cleansed and forgiven of our sins. And so we can then end our life pure and be able to enter through that gate that is a pearl, that is white, that is pure. All right, so the gates represent that. Haley said, this says the streets were gold. The gold, like of verse 18, is unlike any known to us, for it is a transparent glass, transcending the beauty of any metal known on earth. And so gold is very shiny, but this is describing gold as transparent as glass. That is, you can see your reflection in it. It is so shiny. Such an amazing, beautiful thing that it's described here. There is nothing that can compare to this city. And so then look at verse 22 through 26. It says, but I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are in its temple. The city had no need of the sun or the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God illuminated it. The Lamb is its light. And the nations of those who are saved shall walk in its light, and the kings of the earth shall bring their honor and or glory and honor into it. Its gates shall not be shut at all by day, there shall be no night there. And they shall bring the glory and the honor of the nations into it. And so we're seeing this picture of the city, and that there is no need for light. The whole city is described as a sanctuary. The Lamb of God, the Lamb and God are the temple. Somebody read Revelation 3 and verse 12. Revelation 3 and verse 12.
He who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go out no more. I will write on him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God, and I will write on him my new name.
All right, so Revelation 3 describes us as those that are righteous will become a pillar in that temple. Well, that's becoming you think about a pillar, what is a pillar in association with a building? Support. Does a pillar get taken away and put back and removed and moved? No, it doesn't. A pillar stands forever in that building until the building comes down. Well, this building's not going to fall down, right? This temple is described here. And so that sanctuary or that temple, we are those pillars. And our name, well, God's name will be written upon that. We've seen that imagery before. We'll see that in chapter 22 of the name of God written upon the foreheads of the righteous. And so there is this picture of being in that temple with God. And so if we are there and we'll never have to leave, what does that mean about our relationship with God? What does that mean about our access to God? It's unlimited, right? It's never going to end. We're going to be in his presence at all times. We're going to see that imagery in chapter 22 again, of being with the face of God. It's amazing to think about that there is no having to find God, or there's no needing to pray to God, because we're going to be right there with him, right? We're going to be able to talk with him and have access to him. But it says there's no need for physical light. Well, for one, it's a spiritual place, right? So there's no need for literal light. But why is there no need for the sun? Why is there no need for the sun, the light from the moon that shines at night? Okay, because God is light. What light was there in the beginning? What day did the sun get created? Yeah. So there was, I think it's day 4, right? So there was 3 days where there was no natural light from the sun or the moon. God was that light. And so God is that light in heaven. Why? And, there's so much with that. Dale talked about this light last week. John chapter 1. Who is that light? Christ. He is the light of man. And so there's so much being pulled into here. And John wrote John chapter 1, right? And he's writing the book of Revelation. So you can imagine, there's a lot of similarities between his writings and things that he wrote about in John that are used in the book of Revelation, because he sees that imagery of Christ being that light. God is that light in heaven. He is that. There's no need for the sun. There's no need for any natural light. For one, it's a spiritual place. But notice it says in verse 25 The gates shall not be shut all day because there is no night there. You could take that imagery also, right? Think about the fact that the nighttime represents a time where evil and wickedness will survive. Well, there is no wickedness in the world anymore. There's no, or in heaven. There's no more wickedness in heaven. And so there's no need, there's no nighttime. It's always light. The gates will never be shut. Why?
Because there's no enemies there.
There's no enemies there. No one can enter in that is not pure. It's just so much that ties in with many things throughout Scripture. And that imagery here of this glorious place. And so all glory, it says here in verse 24, the kings of the earth shall bring glory and honor into it. All glory is given to God and owed to God. And we are those kings and priests that bring that honor and glory to him. And so, I talked about that already. All right, so verse 27. It says, but there shall by no means enter, right chapter. Anything that defiles or causes an abomination or a lie, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. Haley says this is when the saints go marching in. You know, there's that song, When the Saints Go Marching In. That is the picture that's given here. The saints will enter in. Those that are defiled, those that are causing abomination or lie, those that are not in the book of life, they will not enter. You think about it this way. There is some country songs, there's other songs too, that describe being able to sneak into heaven, right? Or being able to just barely make it in. I'm going to be in the back door. Now, what's the word? I want to say the slums. The idea of, well, I'm just going to barely make it in. Let's just say that. There is no just barely making it in. There is no sneaking into heaven, either written in the book of life or not. There's no towing that line to just, I'm just going to barely creep in. I'm going to sneak in and God's not going to know it. No, that's not going to happen. We will march in with our King, right? He will come and receive us. We will go up into the clouds, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, and meet him in the clouds, and we will enter into into heaven's rest with our King. And so that's the picture that's given here.
I always wonder why it wasn't that way in the beginning. Because didn't Satan start out in heaven?
No, heaven was not created at that time.
Established.
Yeah, because I don't think it was, because when Jesus said in John 14, I go to prepare a place for you, I think he's preparing that place in heaven. That's a place for the righteous. I don't think that they were in heaven as we're going to see in the future. But that's an interesting thought. I never really thought about that. But I can't imagine Satan being in a place that Jesus still hasn't created, because Jesus wouldn't have said that in John 14. I don't know where they were at. That's a good point. It's a good thought. I don't know how to answer that completely.
It saved us a lot of time.
Yeah. I don't know how to answer that, Kathy. You got me stumped. Yeah, I'm gonna think about that. My first reaction is that Jesus said he's going to go prepare a place for us. And so I would think that this place that he's preparing is a place that Satan has not been. You think about it this way. Angels are created beings. They are created, and so they would have been created also. And I believe they were created at creation also. But they were created for a ministering to us. I don't know. I have to think about that some more. You can say something?
Well, the Haitian rim is, Moses and
Elijah.
Elijah and several of them came down
Mm-hmm.
with Christ, and at different times we hear ones. The Haitian rim is where everybody's staying right now, because
Mm-hmm.
they haven't had the final judgment. Otherwise, you would have some in heaven, some not, and that's not going to work with everything I studied to that.
Yeah, that's a good point, because with the Hadean realm is a waiting place, so that could be where they're at, is the Hadean realm.
That's the way I
It could be.
understood it.
I don't know. That's an interesting question. You got me stumped. I'll have to think about it.
God created Satan.
Yeah, he was an angel. He chose to do something different.
He had to, if he knew there was going to be a place for the righteous, he had to prepare a place for the unrighteous.
Yeah.
That's kind of logic. So
Well,
how that exactly came about, I don't know. But I mean,
well, and heaven and hell is described as a place prepared for the devil and his angels.
yeah, it had to be
So,
prepared.
mm-hmm.
But I don't know if this, like heaven, it's not prepared yet, or, and like Mark said, everybody's just in Hades, or it is ready, and you just get to go there. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know, interesting thought. I'll think about it more. Hadean realm, I like that because it's a place, a waiting place, so they could be where they're at now.
Don't lose sleep over it.
Oh, I don't know.
You
We'll
know,
see.
You're supposed to know
If
that.
we knew, if we're, yeah.
Oh, I don't know everything. I don't know everything.
Well, that's like Dale mentioned, you know, talking to Paul and everything, when we get, I don't believe that way. I used to believe that way, but I changed because if we're gonna be worshiping God and everything, doing that kind of stuff, we're not gonna be up there visiting with each other.
Yeah.
After I done more study and research, that's how I feel. But I didn't say anything to him or anything because that is not to do our salvation. That's just, this chapter and the end of Revelation is just, none of us really, really know, that, and it's not to do our salvation. What we think heaven's gonna be like, or where everybody is and stuff, that's just, for the people that like to meet part of the, Bible, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's just, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, you know, the description that we're given here, we're not told what heaven really is going to be like. We just know that it's a place of rest. It's described as a place where our tears will be wiped away, as we saw in chapter 21. It's a place of no pain, no sorrow, and all that. There's no sin there, so there's not going to be temptation. We know the picture that's given in 21 is that is a place that is beautiful, it's amazing, it's perfect. And so that's what we're given. What it will be like, we don't know. We don't even know what we're going to look like. 1 John chapter 3, verse 1 and 2 says, when we see him, we will be like him. And so that the righteous, when they see Christ come, we will be changed and we will look like him. Because that's be our spiritual body and things. So, yeah. And so we don't know. Yeah, we don't know what heaven will be like. We don't know everything that will go on in heaven. But we are told there are things that we'll be praising God, we'll be worshiping him, and things like that. So, I don't know.
I also noticed that you used the word church in place of the word city there earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So is heaven basically God's church?
It's his kingdom, and so you think about a kingdom. The church is a kingdom. It's kingdom that's here, but it's also that kingdom. This description given in chapter 20 of the bride being presented to Christ, that's the church, the kingdom being presented to him in heaven. And so the kingdom of heaven is the church, but it's also that eternal kingdom that will be there in heaven. And so some people approach chapter 21 as it talking about specifically the church, the city being the church. I think it's the church in heaven. I think it's the church being described as in that city together with him. I think it's the best description of it. I mean, I may be wrong, but it doesn't matter. All that matters is that the church is in heaven. So, yep. Any other questions? Imagery doesn't end. It continues on for the first 5 verses in chapter 22. But any other questions on this? Nope. I love it. It's good. I love this. I love the book of Revelation. It's fun to study. And I'm probably not right on everything. There's things that we have to try to determine by interpretation. But the general theme and what it means and what it points to and the hope that it gives is what's important. And so, 22. Somebody want to read verse 1 through 5 for me, please.
And he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding from the throne of God and of the Lamb. In the middle of its street and on the either side of the river was the tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, each tree yielding its fruit every month. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And there shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him. They shall see his face, and his name shall be on their foreheads. There shall be no night there. They need no lamp nor light of the sun, for the Lord of God gives them light, and they shall reign forever and ever.
All right. So verse 1, he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding from the throne of God and of the Lamb. So we have a picture of this river that's proceeding from where? Throne of God and the Lamb. Somebody read John 4, verse 10 and 11.
Jesus answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he have given you living water. The woman said to him, Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water?
All right, so Jesus talked about with the woman at the well in John 4 of this living water, and it says a well that never ends. What is that well? It's coming from who? Christ. It's coming from the throne of God. That's the picture given in chapter 22. So we have this imagery of the throne of Jesus, and this river is flowing from them. As we're going to see, this river will flow through the city and out. And so it doesn't describe out, but it flows through the city. But this river never dries up. Okay? And the reason is because life and light comes, or life comes through Christ. John chapter 1, 1 through 4. And Jesus describes himself as that living water. And so that's the picture that's given here. Somebody read John 7 and verse 38 also.
He who believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water.
All right, so that river gives life, and it is the full of life, right? And so that picture giving here is that life continuing to flow, and it's going to furnish life to all these things that we'll see through the rest of these few verses. But as we approach this chapter, I kind of skipped over this, but I want to talk about it. We continue to see this picture of the church in heaven, and there is a lot of similarities between verse 1 through 5 and Genesis chapter 1 and 2. Okay? There was rivers in the Garden of Eden, was there?
Would 1 Corinthians 10:4 go with this?
Go ahead and read it.
And they all ate the same spiritual food and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ.
Yep. So Paul is referring to the food, the manna and the water that came for the children of Israel when they're in the wilderness. But it says that rock of water was Christ. So Christ was that sustaining life for them in the Old Testament, and he's using it to describe Christ as that sustaining of life in the New Testament, spiritual life. And so that food, Jesus talks about that in John chapter 7, John chapter 5. He is that food and he is that water, and the bread of life and the water. So yeah, it goes with this because Christ is that living water. So, and so this picture that's given here, we have a comparison between the Garden of Eden and of heaven. So in Eden, there was a garden, right? There was a river. The river is described as the river Euphrates. There was also the tree of life, right? With the tree of life, what did that bring for humanity that was living there, for Adam and Eve? If they were able to access the tree of life, what did that mean for them? They could have lived forever. Eden was a place where man was able to live forever because they had access to the tree of life. Okay, so in this description we're going to see through this first few verses, we have eternal Eden. This is heaven. We have the river of life, the tree of life, but some similarities that are things that are not similar. In the garden, there was disobedience, right? There was sin. There was separation from God. There was a curse in chapter 3 on the serpent, on the soil and man, and on the woman, separation from God, and then death, right? But that is something that's different in this picture in chapter 22. There's not going to be a curse. There's perfect fellowship with God. There's no separation from God, and there's no death. And as we're going to see, heaven has that tree of life again. And so there's some similarities that John will use with the Garden of Eden. When I talk about Genesis chapter 1 and 2, I always try to compare the Garden of Eden to heaven, because it was a place that God prepared for man to live for eternity, or for forever, not die. But because of sin, they were removed from that, right? They were removed from that close connection with God. They were removed from the tree of life. Therefore, that means they would die. Does that death, that curse of death, continue for us? Yes. Why? Why does that continue for us? Why does each one of us at some point going to die? Because we all have sinned. We're going to see that in Romans chapter 5 and verse 12. And so this river of life, flows from Christ. We'll continue on in this description here. And
Sorry.
go ahead.
I think a better way to say that is that death is a consequence to all humans because of sin, not because you have sinned, because otherwise we wouldn't die.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in my mind, that was probably a better way to say that.
Read Romans 5 verse 12.
Right.
We're going to see it in a second. But no, you're right. It's not, sin does not pass down. It's not, we're not talking about that. But death entered the world because of sin.
Yes,
and that's what Romans 5:12 says.
And I think a better way, instead of saying you're going to die because you sinned, is people die because of sin, because it entered the world.
Go ahead and read that.
Okay. Therefore, do not let sin reign in your mortal body, that it should obey its lust.
Romans 5 verse 12.
Therefore, just as though one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, and all thus death spread to all men because of all sin.
Okay, so yes, you're right. And the fact that death entered the world because of Adam, that was his problem.
Yes.
And that's the context there. Paul is going to say, death entered this world because of one man, Adam.
Yes.
And death passed upon all of us because of Adam. And then through one man, Christ, life can pass through affirm. But all men have sinned, because King James says all men have sinned, because death passes on all man because all man sin, is what King James says. That's how I quote it. That's how I remember it. And so, yes, babies die because death entered the world.
Yeah, because of...
Yes, not because of their sin.
Yes.
But death continues on because none of us are perfect.
Right.
And you think about it, Christ, that brings into a different thought. Death entered this world, and Christ lived this life perfect, right? Did that mean that he would have died? Death entered this world. He was physical, so death was going to happen. But I think it's interesting that on the cross, who chose to die? Christ chose to die. He gave his life. We say that, he gave his life. He chose to put himself there. He chose to give up the ghost. He chose to, and that's the statement that's used. He gave up his ghost. He chose to do it. So that's an interesting thought. Thinking about Jesus being perfect, he never sinned. And so that curse did not happen. I mean, it did, but because of he bore the sins for us. That's a whole different subject, but it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, and also, someone said that everybody died. Well, if Christ comes first, we won't die.
No.
We'll go on.
But our physical bodies will, still. Our physical bodies will, and technically.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We'll be changed in a twinkle of an eye, but yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and it's, there's several passages that talk about death passes on, death is something that's happened to all of us. But yeah, if Christ comes back, we won't die as some people die, but our bodies will end. Yeah, for sure.
Sorry, I didn't mean to be argumentative. I just would not want anybody to hear that statement that had lost a child and be like, well,
Mm-hmm.
my child didn't sin. Just like clarify.
No, because you're good in clarifying that, because if you take the position that a child dies because of sin, then we're talking about inherited sin,
Right.
and that's not
They
true.
do die because of sin, because, like you said in Romans 5:12, sin came into the world.
Yes.
Otherwise, we would all live forever.
Mm-hmm. But it's not because they sinned, because they hadn't sinned. That's right. And that goes back to Ezekiel chapter 12, and talking about inherited sin. That doesn't happen. even though that is a doctrine of the world today. Anyways, we continue on looking at this river, and it says the river is as clear as crystal. I think it's interesting because this is opposite of what we've seen before. So let me read Revelation 8 and verse 10. This river is going to be different, of course. But Revelation 8 and verse 10.
Then the third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water.
Okay, so that water, polluted water in a sense, brought about death, right? Chapter 16, verse 4 through 7.
Then the third angel poured out his bowl on the rivers and springs of water, and they became blood. And I heard the angel of the waters saying, You are righteous, O Lord, the one who is and who was and who is to be, because you have judged these things, for they have shed the blood of the saints and the prophets, and you have given them blood to drink, for it is their just due. Through 8?
No, that's it.
Okay.
So we've seen an image of rivers being polluted, right? So you think about this as all imagery. It's not literal. But the water of life that supplied the wicked of this world was polluted, right? It led to death. But the river of life that comes from Christ, the water that supplies for essential life, it brings healing, it brings life, it brings eternal life, it brings everything amazing and glorious. And so you have this description throughout some of the book of Revelation of this polluted water that brings death, but we have this river of water that comes from Christ that is life. Now, this imagery has been seen before. Somebody read Ezekiel 47. We're not going to read all this context, but specifically just read verse 1 and verse 9. If you want to read the rest of the context, I encourage you to, but you'll see some of the similarities between this few verses here. But Ezekiel 47, verse 1, and then verse 9.
Then he brought me back to the door of the temple, and there was water flowing from under the threshold of the temple toward the east, where the front of the temple faced east. The water was flowing from under the right side of the temple, south of the altar. And it shall be that every living thing that moves wherever the rivers go will live. There will be a very great multitude of fish because these waters go there, for they will be healed, and everything will live because the river goes.
All right, so as we talked about, there's a lot of Ezekiel that has a similar imagery of Revelation. Ezekiel is seeing this river of life that brings healing. It says they're healing. In the context, it talks about the healing, the fruit, and things like that. And that was a description of Christ and how life would be under him. And so Ezekiel looked to the church under Christ. John is seeing that same imagery, but in a different way. Not really different, but similar, but different a little bit. But the church, he's seeing the glory of the church with Christ in heaven. So Ezekiel is seeing the church under Christ on this earth, and John is seeing the glory of the church with Christ in heaven, with this healing, with this life that is given here. And so a lot of similarities there. But verse 2, before we'll finish verse 2 and we'll stop there. It says, in the middle of its street and on either side of the river was the tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, each tree yielding its fruit every month. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And so the street. Now, depending on what version you read, there's a little bit different translation of this verse. Some, I think it's the ASV and I think the ESV, they more point to the fact that it's a street. And so we're referring back to the street that's talked about in chapter 22 or chapter 21. And so the imagery of John is that there's a street, which we saw in chapter 21, that's gold, and along this street is the river flowing. But in the New King James, it kind of gives the imagery that the path that this river is going is the street. And on each side of it is the trees that were talked about here. Either way, it doesn't matter. It could be either way. It might fit better to have a saying that the street that is of gold, beside the street is this water, this river that's flowing through the city. But on either side of the street were trees and the tree of life. Okay, so the tree of life was in the garden, right? And man was separated from the tree of life. Where do we see the tree of life later? The only next time it's mentioned is in heaven, right? Revelation 2 and verse 7. And so this now, as those that are righteous that have entered into heaven, now have access to this tree of life again. But I think it's interesting is it's beside the river. And you think about a river and trees that are beside the river. Where are they getting their water? From the river. So the tree of life, where is it getting its water sustaining ability? From the river, which comes from who? From God. So the image there is the tree of life is being supplied by God. Okay? And it's producing, these trees are producing fruits, but specifically it mentions a tree that is supporting fruits, but it says 12 different fruits, right? It gives fruit every month. Do we have trees that give fruit every month? It's only like once time a year, right? One season of the year. This tree is giving fruit once a month. Now, some versions, they add the ASV, it points to the fact that it's 12 different fruits. Now, there's no trees that have 12 different fruits, right? That doesn't fit within of God's creation. And so this is not a literal tree, but it's a depiction of the life-giving fruits that is needed for man to receive healing and to receive life in heaven. And so just imagery.
God describing that he's going to be taking care of us.
Yep.
We won't
100%.
be working to go buy, food to eat.
Yep.
It's going to be furnished there for us.
Which the Garden of Eden was that way. They tended the garden, but God provided everything they needed, right? So that's the same picture here, exactly. Just using that imagery that we can understand to describe God being that sustaining life for all of us. And that healing, the healing that's talked about there too. Any other comments on this? We'll stop here. I think it's a good point to stop. We'll pick up here next week.